بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
You are not like other carbon-based life forms. You put the value of all life above your own.
Welcome to the fourth episode of the second season of Silent Messages of the fourth podcast. I'm Ibrahim Ali.
And I'm Talha Muhammad.
You can help us grow by giving us a follow on Instagram at thefourth.productions and Twitter at thefourth_prod. So this week we have a very special guest with us, Sheikh Mikaeel. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. Pleasure to be here.
So Sheikh Mikaeel, this season was about empathy. The title of the season is Silent Messages, which we actually took from your book. You've used it as a citation in there. The structure of this podcast is that we talk about our topic through three different lenses before we ask you about them.
Okay.
And so in the first episode, we talked about empathy through the lens of current affairs. And specifically, we talked about empathy with the working class. So we touched on labor strikes. We touched on the material conditions of the laborer class in this country, how they're being exploited for their labor, and we talked about how we can best empathize with them.
Okay.
Based on the conditions that they face. So from your experience, how do we implement empathy with people who are struggling financially?
Subhanallah. It's an interesting question. I think Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. First of all, I think like the topic of silent messages and looking at empathy as a cultural problem is huge. So I mean hats off to the organizers because of the topic is very big, and as Muslims, I think we don't realize enough how key empathy is to the prophetic message, to what the Prophet ﷺ was doing with the people around him, and to connect with people, how important empathy is. So I really think like focusing on empathy as a topic is huge. All right, so you began with empathizing with the working class people. I mean, there's so many ways to look at that. I think beginning with, if we look, I'm going to take it from the religious perspective.
That's what we want you to do.
Taking the Prophet ﷺ's life and using that as an example. If we study his life, the beginning stages of his life, what do we find? Okay, we find a young boy who's orphaned, right, from the beginning. He's taken under the care of his grandfather. Not only a little time after that, his grandfather passes away and he's taken under the care of his uncle. Now, his uncle is not privileged. His uncle isn't very wealthy. Not only that, his uncle has a lot of his own children. So here we find the Prophet ﷺ being introduced into a family which there's a lot of other mouths to feed and there's not a lot of money going around. And then we find the moment he gets a little bit of strength as a young man, he starts to work, and he says that all of the prophets of God, alayhimu salatu wasalam, all of the prophets of God, they were shepherds. And then the Sahaba asked him, the companions, they were like, well, you too? He was like, yeah, I used to shepherd the livestock of the Quraysh for just a few pennies when I was a young man. And so this first job that he had wasn't a privilege, let me take a second job because it'll be good extra money. It was like, we gotta eat. And so the Prophet ﷺ is now, taking care of other people's livestock. And it's a very interesting thing. I think one of the beautiful things about the working class is Islam has a deep relationship with being someone who works for your money, sweats for your money and your livelihood. And so the Prophet ﷺ now, what are we seeing? We're seeing that the Prophet of Islam, who all Muslims claim to follow, the beginning of his life is having a very, very low job, quote unquote. Not a lot of benefits when it comes to financially. But here's the key. It has huge lessons and there's a lot of things that are learned through that job. So that's the first thing. And then secondly, we see right after that, he goes into business because his people were businessmen. So now he's trying to make an earning, earn his living by through business. So what I'm trying to say is, if we look at the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, and look at his ability to connect with people, I think a lot of it has to do with his humble beginnings and where he came from. And that is key when it comes to empathizing with people, is truly, truly connecting, understanding on a deep level what it's like to be someone who, works hard for the living that they have. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, man, I think there's great blessings in that lifestyle. I know it's hard. Like every day you're going out to work, you're sweating, you're working hard. People don't look up to what you're doing. But nonetheless, the lessons that are learned and how you're able to now, as you grow up, as you go forward and earn and become higher up on the scale, on the ladder economically, as long as you don't forget where you came from, you will be someone who's always able to connect to people on that lower end and inspire other people as well. So I think when we talk about empathy with the working class, I think a lot of people have to really touch base, especially Muslims. What I find with Muslims is once you make it, you kind of we see you move off to the suburbs, you move off to your suburban masjid, mm-hmm. and you kind of forget about what you were doing 20 years ago, mm-hmm. and the struggles that you were going through, and your kids have no clue, mm-hmm. And so we have this really privileged mentality, right? And so I feel like the key to having empathy for the working class is those of us who have moved forward. We always have to remember where we came from so we can appreciate the struggles of those who are and honestly that sense of hard work and effort is what builds the society, man. It's what builds the economic stability of a country, man, big time. And entitlement is going to destroy us. Mm-hmm. But so I think the connection with empathy with the working class is that we have to remember our humble beginnings and be able to connect and listen to the struggles of the average man.
So in your book, you talk about emotional intelligence, right? So what are some of the signs that we can look for? Again, the title of our season is Silent Messages, right? So what are some of the signs that we can look for that the working class is giving off, that we can, look and see that, oh, these guys are crying out for help and we should be able to empathize with them and, give them help.
So the thing about when we talk about a hardworking, so before I go, I'm from a family with a single mother who was working, 2 jobs to support me and my sister. And so when you talk about working class, that's something that I've seen face to face. Latchkey kid, come home, heat up your own lunch or your own, snack after you get home from school. Mom gets home late because there's 2 jobs. And struggle was intrinsic part of life. With that said, the working class man or woman is not going to sit there and vocally tell you they need help. That's where emotional intelligence is even more important, because you need to be able to read people deeply, understand that those who work the hardest but need help are not going to often vocalize their help, mm-hmm. their need. And so as a community, we can't be kind of like, oh, if you guys need anything, come and let us know. No, that's not the prophetic way. Mm-hmm. When it comes to emotional intelligence, it's about being able to read between the lines, read the silence. As you said, silent messages is being able to read the silence, which is, okay, a person doesn't say they need help, but you have to be aware of people's circumstances. And I don't think we do a good enough job. Even if you have zakat set up at your masjid, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get the people who truly, truly need that walking in there just because of their, what we call izzatun nafs, their honor for themselves. They always think there's someone more deserving than them that needs that money. And so we need to have people involved in the community who are literally just having feelers out there for those in the community who are working hard, struggling, and need that help. So what are the signs? I mean, that's really hard to like place, because it's going to be different from every, culture, every people. Some cultures in the Muslim community will get offended if you try to like give them something. They get offended by that, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you need that cultural intelligence to understand, well, how do we help these type of people who we know need it but aren't taking our help? Those are the questions that we need to ask. It's like, all right, here's a group of people we know need our help. But their cultural side of them is not letting us just drop money on them. Like, how do we, get past that? And so I think a large level of cultural intelligence is needed when you're trying to actually help. Man, I've had situations where it goes so wrong because you try to help someone and they get super offended. They get super offended by that. So, I think the main thing when it comes to emotional intelligence in the community is we're so disconnected nowadays from one another that just as a topic, listening to unsaid messages is not being spoken about. Right? We're not at all talking about it. And so I think give lectures, classes, that's the reason why I wrote the book, is because I wanted people to see that part of being a Muslim is to go past the external, go deeper, connect with someone on a deeper level, and understand what they need without them having to communicate that to you. So, wallahu alam, it's a tough one. It's a tough one.
I think it speaks volumes that the metropolitan area that we're in has a plethora of mosques.
Yes.
There's no shortage, alhamdulillah. But all the mosques are pretty much all in the suburban areas, and there's none in the urban core. There's like one, I think, right? Or maybe two. What can we say about so what we can derive from that is that the Muslim community in this area at least is pretty well off. We all mostly congregate in the suburbs. We live very middle class, upper middle class kind of lifestyles.
Definitely.
What's the importance, and what do we see from the prophetic tradition of going back to the urban core, giving back over there, reaching out to Muslims and non-Muslims who live tougher lives that in the American lifestyle, we like to ignore and put away. We like to move away to the suburbs so that we don't have to see that struggle,
exactly.
right? But what can we learn from the prophetic tradition about actually going back to that urban core, reinvesting over there, talking with people over there, making connections over there? What can you advise us?
Oh man, there's so much to say. So from my experience, I moved from Baltimore, okay, and Baltimore. The demographic, Baltimore, D.C. area, it's a completely different demographic. America, it's so different from one state, one country, East Coast, West Coast, Southern, so different vibes. And definitely what you're saying, we're being in DFW area, Dallas, Fort Worth, all of, as you said, masjids are suburban. What's interesting, as I said in the beginning, what's interesting is majority of the people who are now living in the suburban areas, and this same thing happens across the country. What happens, this is the crazy part, what happens is, and I don't want to pit this as a indigenous versus like immigrant type thing, but I think we do need to understand that back in the 70s there was an influx in immigrants coming over for education. Now when they would get over here, where was Islam? There was already Islam established in many of the urban areas. Your inner city masjid, right? So all across the country, you have these inner city masjids, East Coast, West Coast, and the South, that were the source or refuge in the beginning years of the 70s and 80s for people coming over. Soon as people graduate, soon as people get established, now we need to establish our own stuff. And what happens is we go out, buy land, and we establish a masjid somewhere else. And the masjid in the inner city that took care of us is still looking in the bad shape that it always has. Oh man, there's so much to say about it. I mean, we definitely have a responsibility. I think our children need to understand that that is part of our ummah. Not only part of our ummah, it is an intrinsic part of Islam in America. You know what I'm saying? It's an intrinsic part of how the suburban masajid got set up. I mean, here, Masjid al-Islam is one of the oldest masjids. It is, without a shadow of doubt, one of the oldest masjids here. And if you look at it, as you just said, it's just like clearly one of the it has the least resources. And so what does that say as a community about us? Does it say that we don't remember where the blessing came from? Does it say that we are very cultural? Does it say that there's a lot of classism in the community? I mean, majority of these inner city masjids are going to be African American masjids, right? What does that say about the African American Muslim perception of suburban Muslim communities, right? Like, how do they view? I was at one masjid for a while, and they had invited a imam from the inner city masjid who had been an imam for 30 plus years inner city. And so this semi-suburban masjid invited him to do khutbah. And I happened to be there for some reason. I can't remember what was going on. But he said something. He said, and there was a new board on that masjid, so they were like trying to be very inclusive and stuff. He's like, you guys know this is the first time in 30 years I've given a khutbah at this masjid. And the board was just shocked because he's a pillar of the community. But it was just over, how did that get missed? So, I mean, you bring up a huge issue. I mean, I think it's a series on its own, the divide between this classism, man. And I think what we're doing as Muslim Americans, we're falling into the American paradigm of the haves and the have-nots and forgetting the ummah. You know what I'm saying? We're separating ourselves just because it's the American way of life to go move out into the most expensive suburb and go there and just, you know, get the picket fence, as they say, you know, and live the American dream. I think we just drank the Kool-Aid, man. Yeah. We drank the Kool-Aid, and what I mean by that is, so what do? The second generation and third generation has to make a strong effort to bridge the gap. A strong effort to bridge the gap. And I've seen it here in DFW where a few of the youth from, you know, Plano and Frisco, they were the ones organizing the fundraisers for the inner city masjids. Like, no, this is our community and we're going to take care of it. So I think what we definitely got to communicate to the second and third generation that you have a huge responsibility to take care of the place that took care of your parents when they got here. Yeah. That's crazy, man. Take care of the place that took care of your parents' iman when they got here. Yeah,
it really does break my heart when I see, you know, Masjid al-Islam came to our community in Ramadan and they had a hard time raising any money. And it was like, it really shed a light up for me. It showed that, you know, we really lack empathy for these communities that are really struggling. And there's a very strong argument to be made that these masajid are the ones that are doing the most work.
Oh, huge! Without I don't want to say like across the board, but like with the amount of resources they have compared to the amount of work being done. So this is the deal, man. If we're gonna just start to discuss this issue, look, unless you're giving back, unless you build social capital, the people in the area don't care about you. You are nothing unless you're giving back to a community that you're in. But giving back not just to show. You know what I'm saying? Like authentic, genuine giving is your social capital. And what I mean by that is the people, your neighbors value for you. Right? If you put a for sale sign up. Now look, let's study the Prophet ﷺ's life. When Abu Bakr radiallahu an said he was leaving Mecca, someone stopped him. And they're like, where are you going? He's like, I'm out. I'm done with this place. They're not letting me worship. That person, his name was Ibn Dughunna. He said, no. Someone like you can't leave. La yakhruj wa la yukhraj. Someone like you, we don't let leave, nor is forced out. Translate that into social capital. You're too valuable for us to let you go. He brought him back in. He took care of him, whatever. My point is, man, this capitalism is killing us, bro. Materialism is just killing us, bro. Because it's like, yo, the inner city masjids are valued by the indigenous people around them. I know an inner city masjid in Buffalo, New York, man. The non-Muslim parents tell the kids, go play. I don't care. As long as you're playing by that masjid, I don't care what you do. Mm-hmm. Just play over there.
Wow.
Right? Like realize you want people to value you. Mm-hmm. And so again, I think I'm going to say we drank the Kool-Aid, man. Mm-hmm. We drank the Kool-Aid, bro. Like our parents drank the Kool-Aid. They just, built their own little, pair of Jannahs, and got comfortable in them. And then we feel like, subhanAllah, like when those masjids go and ask for fundraisers in the suburban masjid, the first thing that happens is like, see, there's this problem, man. The problem is we don't understand structural violence. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is poverty is considered your crime, your fault.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Like, it's your fault you're poor. Like, you didn't do enough. Mm-hmm. Which completely neglects or chooses to ignore the mechanisms in place to keep certain people in certain positions. Mm-hmm. And I think our community often, when they see Masjid al-Islam and all of these masjids coming, they go, well, look what we did. Why can't you guys do it? Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, like I said, they drank the Kool-Aid, man.
So this brings up a very interesting point that we talked about in the first episode about how the people that control the vast amount of capital in our society pit us against each other, and how they bring divisions amongst ourselves. So I mean, from your experience, how do we combat that, and how do we recognize that?
So I think those type of key like as a religion, Islam, when you truly understand the objectives of it for social welfare and betterment, that should be something that is part and parcel with you as a Muslim. Mm-hmm. Do you get what I mean? That should be something that doesn't take much figuring out, that we need to care for the weakest amongst us. Like, there's a plethora of source material, primary source material, that shows that our societal welfare is based on the weakest amongst us from the Islamic perspective, and that we need to be investing in them. And this whole one of the things we talk about in emotional intelligence and empathy is being able to feel the pain, being able to understand the pain of the one you're interacting with. And what we've done with the classism, what we've done is we've completely separated ourselves from them. So that pain, we're desensitized, as you guys brought up before. Like, we don't see Masjid al-Islam. Like, we don't see what they're going through. We don't, because we've chosen to put ourselves off to somewhere else in this nice little corner. So we don't see what's going on. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so it was one time I just happened to go to masjid, since we're in Dallas, I just happened to go to Masjid al-Islam for a Jummah. I didn't have anything to do. I was like, I'm going to go there, right? And coincidentally, not giving khutbah, I see Sheikh Sulaiman there. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'm just like, oh, what are you doing here? He's like, yeah, just come here, man. I like to come here, And I'm like, subhanAllah, man. That's what we need. We need to build those bridges. You need to just go to those spots, be with those people, chill with them, talk with them, see their struggles, be a part of that. And so you can't build empathy unless you start to be with, like the Prophet ﷺ said. Let's talk about this. The Prophet ﷺ used to make dua, oh Allah, keep me amongst the masakin. Mm-hmm. Keep me amongst them. Masakin means poor, right? Mm-hmm. Keep me amongst them. Keep me with them. Keep me around them. Mm-hmm. You can't dream of having empathy, having a connection with people that you always try to stay away from. Yeah. Right? But here's the conundrum, though. Here's the paradox of the whole thing, which is the moment there is political pressure on us, we run back to the minority African American community for support.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then it's not vice versa also. Because especially over here, there's remember the shooting of Botham Jean in Dallas. I never saw any Muslims going. A lot of the majority of Muslims that they kind of stayed back and they didn't go forward to help.
Yeah, although Umar
So-
Suleiman was at the forefront of that.
So, but here's the deal. Here's the deal. I feel like, okay, there's a few tough issues within the Muslim community, okay? Muslims in America Muslims in general have a global ummah perspective first and foremost, okay? We have this perspective where, of course, every Muslim across the world is a part of our ummah, right? And we care for the well-being of them. And what I think is happening a lot is emotional burnout. I think there's a lot of emotional burnout. And what I mean by that is, like, you got so many huge issues that alone are enough to emotionally, like, deplete everything you got. You just take the Muslims in China. Like, that alone is enough to just be like, oh my God, what are we gonna do about this, right? Then you take Philistine. We just saw what was happening in Philistine just a few weeks ago, which is an ongoing thing, right? If you just Burma, right? All of these different things that were going on. Kashmir was a few months ago. So what happens, I feel like, is Muslims have this like global perspective, but then they forget about their like local, as far as American responsibility. You know what I'm saying? So you'll hear the khutbah about Kashmir. You'll hear the khutbah about injustices everywhere. But then you won't hear that khutbah about local injustices that are going on, as if we're forgetting what's home too. So we have this kind of like it's two fronts that we're thinking about. We're focused on these global messages on one hand, that we want well-being globally, but at the same time, you know, our own house isn't in line. And I feel like let me give you a more practical like example of the implications of what I'm saying. When it comes time for Eid al-Adha, how many people do you see sending their charity overseas? A large number. Now, the argument can be made that there's more needy people overseas. But Islamically speaking, you do have a responsibility for the closest poverty to you. Like to alleviate the closest poverty to you. But here's the deal. We don't know where the poverty is because we live in our suburban bubbles. You know what I'm saying? We're not seeing that. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of emotional burnout, and this is real. When we talk about empathy, a lot of times, man, like I think there's overload. There's just too much global information constantly hitting our Instagram and Facebook feeds, and we're like, how many things am I gonna like put my emotional energy in?
So I think this blends beautifully into our next topic that we can, delve a little bit into. So we actually, in episode 2, we talked about social media and how, have you ever heard of the concept of like collectivism? And when people post like a post about let's say what's happening in China, what's happening in Kashmir, what's happening in Palestine. So what was the term again? Collectivism. Collectivism. Yeah. Like
okay. I got you.
Yeah. So how do we strike a balance when using social media? Like, how do we maintain being? How do we strike the line between being informed and still maintaining empathy with these people around us and the people?
I don't know, man. That's a tough one. I mean, this whole like collectivism, as you said, well, it's a great term for it, man. Because I think it communicates the idea that I did my job, I shared it. Recently. My wife, there was an inmate who was on death row here in Texas, right?
Yeah,
his name. I'm
forgetting
the name slips my yeah. So my wife called, and there was a number of calls you had to call, and it was like we were on the phone for like an hour, like just trying to get through to people, right? And like going beyond sharing the post and actually making the calls. Bringing awareness. I think a lot of us feel like we did the job when we just share the post. I did my part. Forget it. Share it feels like you did something. If you write your own post, now you really feel like I did something. And
no, it's like I'm gonna go to bed. Sleep easy now.
Yeah, I'm sleep easy now. Exactly. I don't know, bro. I don't know, man. I feel like a lot of times, like. A lot of what we see on social media, man, is a whole different facade, man, a whole different front.
Yeah.
Like, I think we spend a lot of time, so much time on social media, that becomes our world.
Yeah.
and we forget about the real life neighbor down the street, man. You know, I think the funny thing I see about like social media is I think we often forget like how curated the content is that we see, you know, and we quickly start to think that the whole world is seeing what I'm seeing, but we all know that's not the case.
Yeah, we're seeing a very filtered version.
Yeah, you're seeing your algorithm based on what you liked and whatever, right? But this collectivism is definitely a problem because it's not getting us out of our houses. It's not getting us face to face with the people that need us to be there, you know? And so I think if you have a discussion with some of the activists, I think that's the first thing they'll say. All of the Muslim activists that I know of, the first thing they're going to be like is like, yeah, get off of the screen and come and join us at the rally. You know, get off the screen and come and join us at this spot, at that spot, at this spot, and that spot. But again, it's very selective. We'll show up at the Gaza rally. We'll show up at the Kashmir rally. You know what I'm saying? It's very, very like...
And then afterwards you'd be like, "Khalas, I'm done."
Yeah, there's no follow-up.
Yeah.
You know, there's no follow-up. And I think a lot of it, you know, a lot of these things, they're very tough because the average layman, like myself, like I don't know what to do. We see these things and it's like, what do you want me to do? Okay, they gave us a phone number and we called and finally like something happened. You feel, alhamdulillah, I don't know if what I did had a part in that, but I did what I had to do. I think a lot of people, when they see all of these things like China, Kashmir, and all, it's like, okay, I see it. You've shown it to me. Now what? What do I do? And so I feel like we have that, like we feel that pain. Like it's there. We feel it. And then I feel like if there's so many chances when you don't feel something, when you feel something and you can't do anything, after a while you start to just like become desensitized. It's just too much going on. So there's many times like I've had to just like completely shut out social media because after knowing what's going on, the rest is just overload. And to be real with you, there are people around us day to day, like mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, that we're neglecting. And many of the social and societal problems, the foundation of that is not having a healthy family, the family breakdown. And so what I feel like in writing about the moral intelligence and the emotional intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ, his main focus was that at home, like start investing in the people around you. Once we start like building those healthy families, then some of the bigger, broader problems start to be taken care of, right? I think it was Stephen Covey in his 7 Habits, he has that whole circle of influence versus circle of concern. You familiar with it? Like as you focus on things you can actually influence, your influence grows. And the more you spend your time in the circle of what I'm concerned about, but I can't really influence, my influence actually shrinks, right? And so with emotional investment, I think a lot of times with social media, this is real. People get burned out. People definitely get, it's just so much I'm seeing.
Yeah, so we definitely do get desensitized, right?
Yeah.
From like the things that are going on in Kashmir.
So in the 3rd episode, we talked about mental health and how to empathize with people who have mental illness. And one of the things that we touched on in this episode was the role of the opioid crisis and, you know, and how that affects mental health and how that's seen as a solution perhaps, but definitely there's an exploitation of people with mental illness going on, and how the pharmaceutical companies have a large role to play in this, how they're probably complicit in this to some degree and encourage doctors to prescribe these opioids out of in ways that isn't helpful at all, just because they want that those bucks to be rolling in. So what can we say about empathizing with people who have these kind of issues?
Like and addiction, we're talking about
addiction and
substance abuse,
and substance abuse, especially like from the point of view that that they're being exploited by these big corporations like Pfizer and Bayer and so on.
I think we need to, like, I don't know, that's a tough one. I mean, I think this does connect also with when it comes to addiction in general, like, I think there's a lot of correlation between when we started with the people who are being the working class, the struggle of the working class, and the struggle with those battling addiction. I think one of the things that, again, is the common thread in all of these discussions is not understanding that people are victim and subject to the circumstances that they are in. That doesn't mean we don't empower people. That doesn't mean we don't train people to overcome and persevere. But when it comes to empathizing with people and understanding them, I think we need to understand that there are a number of factors. As you're bringing up the pharmaceutical, you're bringing up the prescribing of very addictive drugs to people who may already have genetic, what's it called, like
chemical imbalance.
Yeah, no, like predisposition.
Oh, okay.
Like they're already susceptible to being very easily addicted to something. So like someone put those drugs in their hand. You know, there's someone who kept writing that prescription in the beginning, right? For whatever reason whatever reason there is, as you mentioned, pharmaceutical company, whatever the reason may be. The point is that our role as helpers in society, as Khalifa fil Ard, as people that want to connect to people and help people, is to understand there are a number of things that led to them being in that situation and being able to hear them out. Like, most of the time when it comes to addiction, obviously we know there's an element of escapism. Like, that people are trying to get out of something. They're trying to just get away for a moment of something very difficult that's hard for them to handle. So if we're able to be a part of helping them cope with those hardships, then we're already fighting against the drug abuse. You know what I'm saying? Like we need to be there and be the type of people that are like helping to understand other people. They're already trying to run away from things and they feel like there's no one else to go to, and this is the only way out. And that's why you need people that are ears to listen to people, man. Ears and hearts that listen to other ears and hearts, man. I mean, someone that's addicted to different substances, man. There's so many signs of them calling out that they need help, but everyone's busy, man. Everyone's got stuff to do. It's very tough for people, man.
So on a more like personal scale instead of a systematic one, a lot of us, like young folks, I suppose, we have maybe a friend. For a lot of the high schoolers or college age students from our audience, have like maybe a friend who is abusing substances. Yeah. Right, is on drugs. How do we and for a lot of us, like especially second, third generation, like our parents will just tell us, don't hang out with that kid, he's a bad kid, don't get caught up in that crowd. And so how do we actually keep ourselves from not being influenced by these friends of ours in that way while influencing them to do good?
See, that's a tough one, man, because I feel like every one of us is so like I feel like when it comes to being influenced or influencing, it's always a boxing match. You know what I'm saying? What I mean is you take a few hits, but you give a few too. You know what I'm saying? And so what I mean by that is like sometimes a person can have a really weak or a strong heart. And that person, you're trying to give dawah to them. You're trying to help them. You're trying to be a positive influence. But what's really happening is you're being messed up in the process. Right? And obviously your primary concern should be yourself. I mean, that's common sense, right? So, and then on the other hand, you may have certain individuals who have strong personalities who can positively influence those weaker personalities. Like, it's a younger cousin, it's a younger friend, and they look up to you, and you can positively influence them. So, I think what the way you have to look at friendships is functionality. Like, is there a purpose to this friendship? Like, is there a purpose? Am I benefiting this person, or is this person benefiting me at all? If I am bringing benefit to this person, then there's a purpose behind my befriending this person, and I'm going to stay in that relationship because I can help bring this person out. So long as that's not detrimental to me. It's a boxing match, man. There's some times where there's people I'm interacting with, and I'm like, this person's personality is too strong. There's no progress I can make with this person. The only thing it's going to do is be harmful for me. And a lot of these, especially with substance abuse, because substance abuse is if you're an impressionable teenager, just keeping the company of those friends can be it'll be very hard for you to fight the waves of the pressures of peer pressure. I mean, we all want acceptance. That's something that's really like part of our nature, like acceptance, to be included in something. That's part of who we are as human beings. And so it's I think that's kind of a hard one. I would say to our listeners that, look, you need to value your own well-being first and foremost. That's the first thing. You need to understand how important it is that you don't get caught up. That's the first thing. If you're someone that's not caught up, your first thing is, look, I can't think myself above being addicted to. It can happen to me as well. With that said, now you're on guard a bit. Now you're a bit more careful. Now you're a bit worried, and then you'll look at your relationships with other friends and see if they're beneficial or not beneficial. Sometimes a person is just so... See, the thing we always addiction, like when you're really addicted to something, like alcoholism, for example, I mean, there's a lot of stages to get that person from addiction. Like AA meetings are like serious things. It takes a lot of effort to get that person. And one of the first things they teach you is like that person has to want to change. So here you are befriending this person, trying to change them. But the first thing you learn in that field of addiction, one of the first things is if the person doesn't want to change, there's very, very little you can do to inspire change within that person. And so like, I don't know, I think for the younger crowd, the impressionable younger crowd, then you really need to, your first concern is yourself, not saving other people. Wallahu alam. You can empathize, you can feel the pain, you know what they're going through, but at that point, it's like someone's drowning, but I can't swim. Like, what can I do? Like, there's nothing, there should be 2 dead people. You know what I'm saying? There's gonna be 2 dead people, not one. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so you throw the person a life raft, you know what I'm saying? You throw the person some support. You reach out to someone who has better equipped to take care of that than yourself, and you just back out because I know myself. The problem is at that age, you normally don't know yourself. And we always assume we're stronger than we are. And then before we know it, they're the ones influencing us. You know? So it's a tough one, man. I mean, a lot of times you hear this like, you know, my one friend, he's going off the edge a bit. You know, I want to keep his company. But every time I'm with him, he's lighting up. He's drinking. Drinking is becoming so prevalent amongst the Muslim community. It's no joke. Right? And I think sometimes you just got to like... Because the other problem too is if you spend enough time in that environment, you just it becomes adi, you know, it becomes like normal. It's like it's not even a big deal anymore. You know what I'm saying? At first, as a Muslim, like drinking alcohol, you're like, what? Come on now, we don't do that. What's up? But before you know it, you see everyone, you're like, oh, I guess it wasn't that big of a deal. So now all of a sudden, the seriousness of that sin has now been taken away from your heart because of the amount of time that you're spending with that person.
So what do you think the reason for this desensitization to, like, you know, these sins is? I know you mentioned
exposure.
Yeah.
It's nothing but exposure. See, like, okay, you know how we talk about, I don't want to live in a bubble?
Yeah.
Right. Well, like, look, when you go to med school, they say you live in a bubble. When you go to different types of educational things, you live in the military, you're in a bubble. You go to what's it called? Like an IT training boot camp, you're in a bubble. Like, you go to bubbles in order to get some type of training and preparation for something, right? The reason I'm bringing that up is because spiritually you need a bubble sometimes too. Like, you cannot expose yourself to everything and then expect your spirituality to be top notch all the time. You're going to have to exit and you're going to have to absent yourself from certain environments so that you're just not exposed to it. You cannot be in the thick of things and then expect yourself not to become desensitized to those things. I think that's absurd. If the more you spend around those things, the more you're going to become desensitized to them. And yes, the counter argument is we have to be a part of the society. We have to, well, but how far? How far is the society going to go? Like, are you just going to be a part of everything? You're going to be like, whatever they're doing, you want to be exposed to? Or are there some things you're going to say like, nah, I'm not going to be exposed to that? All right. Well, if you're backing yourself up then I'm gonna say, okay, well, let's start questioning what we're exposing ourselves to. So the way, let's get practical. So what I would say is like when it comes to shoddy environments, like environments that we know like aren't good for our iman, those are the ones that are a need basis. Like I'm only in those environments based on my durura, like the necessity. Above that, I'm out. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't need to be here because it's not good for me. It's not good for me spiritually. But I mean, with the younger audience, man, it takes time to realize, man, like the importance of your spiritual well-being. You know, I think like the younger high schoolers, you have no clue who you are, what your purpose in life is. Sometimes, like it's just like you're still finding yourself. As you start to get older, you start to like question deeper, like, yo, what's life about? This and that, whatever. You know, hopefully by college, a person has started to build their own personality of who they are, and they've realized the importance of spirituality in their lives, right? Once you realize the importance of something, then you automatically avoid the environments that are harmful to that thing that you value. It's just going to naturally happen. You know what I'm saying? If any kid in sports, hardcore in sports in high school, doesn't smoke. Why? Because they know this is going to mess up my sports career. So once the value, spirituality is like the value of your deen and spiritual relationship with God is established in someone's heart, then it's like intuitively understood that this ain't where I'm supposed to be. But I think it just takes some time for people to find themselves.
So what are some things that we can do, you know, like on a personal basis to increase our, you know, the awareness that we have of our spiritual?
When we talk about emotional intelligence and we talk about that topic you're saying right now, one of the primary things we don't do enough is disconnect and focus on mindfulness. Mindfulness and meditation is huge. Like, because like one of the problems, okay, in order to build emotional intelligence, what it requires is for me to be present with you in the moment. That means you're mindful. You're not thinking about 1,000 things as me and you are talking right now. That builds my ability to be present with you and deal with you, talk with you, understand your problems, everything like that. Also, on the other side of spirituality, the thing that gets you to know yourself better is more time by yourself. But our lives are literally plugged in from the moment we're laying down to go to sleep. The moment we wake up, we're back connected to the matrix. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And so why I brought mindfulness up is because in our topic of emotional intelligence, see, emotional intelligence, as you know, is broken down into inter and intrapersonal. So like your ability to connect to others, but your ability to connect to yourself as well, right? And you don't get the ability to connect unless you have the ability to listen. But listening requires mindfulness, and that's why I'm studying right now, like the concept of listening, because throughout our deen is this concept that you have to become good listeners, but that also means being able to listen to your own heart. But if you're constantly engaged and never letting yourself have moments of silence, you can only listen in those moments of silence, right? And so part of building spirituality is disconnecting, man. Taking a walk through the park, go for a hike, like just be by yourself. Be by yourself, and I think you'll find yourself in those moments. But we're just so connected, man, so plugged in. Gotta, you know, subhanAllah, it's easy.
Listening is such a beautiful art as well that we actually have from the prophetic tradition. I love that one hadith narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha, where she goes on for like, I don't know, 3 pages in some books, you know, about just the story of like this one lady, you know, and like, and the dinner party or whatever it is, and the Prophet ﷺ listens the whole time. There's not a single interruption, you know, and then at the end he says, I think I'm most like one of the men who the women were talking about. Yeah,
that's a great example. That's an example of the problem, the hardship with listening is that many people take it as a passive thing, but it's a very active skill. It's not a passive thing. And so to build empathy, so check it out. When a person sees some interest or gain that can be gained from someone, they listen very actively because they know they can get something from it. Like you take a guy who's trying to get a girl. Like he'll sit there, stare in her eyes, and like he's there. He's like completely dialed in. He doesn't touch his phone. He's like so focused, dude. And the moment, like, fast forward 5 years, 5 months, 6 months, she's like, you never pay attention to me, right? And why is that? It's because when he was on the hunt, now he was able to focus because there was something I can get. And so similarly, we do that all the time. When we don't see value in someone, you don't listen to them. Another problem is multitasking, man. Like, we multitask everything, and so we're not able, the moment we tell ourselves, let's do this one thing, listen to this person, all of a sudden my mind is like, all right, but I got this to do, I got that to do, I got that to do. And so, like, part of listening, even, like, one of the things I was studying right now is really interesting, which is, even when you're listening, try to listen without thinking of the response while the person is speaking.
Oh, man.
Like, that's not listening. That's preparing. You're not with me. You're with you.
Yeah.
You know, so while I'm talking, and that means you don't got to answer right at the drop of as soon as I shut up, right? Let there be moments of silence while you process what the person said, right? Think over what the person said. Stay with the person's words for a moment. See what they're saying. Go from their perspective. And don't always feel like I have to reply, right? Yeah, you have to reply, but see, think of this way. Listening, and this applies to ourselves too. Listening is like playing baseball, a catch. It's about throwing the ball at the right speed. It's about catching it, right? It's about catching it again and then throwing it back, right? Where most of us, it's like a batting cave. Like, it's just one way. We're not taking anything. It's just one way. So my point is, like, we need to learn to listen to ourselves better. We're not good listeners anymore. And you can only listen when there's silence. And what I mean by that is, like, two types of silence. I mean, like, actual physical silence, but I also mean inner silence too. You need quietness inside of you, which means you're not thinking over 1,000 things, right? Which means that goes back to, like, more of, like, this idea that productivity is, like, how much I get done. Like, we have this thing that's not quality, it's just quantity of tasks that I've checked off of my list, right? And so I think, like, cutting back on, I gotta get this done, I gotta, and we think it means I'm productive, I did something because I did 1,000 things today. But none of them you did full presently. So what did you do? When you did each of those, you were somewhere else. So you never even lived, because you weren't in any moment that your body was in. So when it comes to protecting our spirituality, it connects with emotional intelligence, and that's learning how to listen to our own hearts and learning how to listen to others. And that requires, like, slowing down and being present with people. Quality moments and enjoying that time you have with people.
Nice.
That's profound. So I know you have a book out, With the Heart in Mind.
Yeah.
Beautiful, amazing book. I've had the pleasure of reading through some of it. Haven't finished it yet. I think I'm just processing it slowly.
So yeah, a lot of people I've talked to, the first introduction and chapter with the aql or intellect, people were like, whoa, this is a bit heavier than I thought it was, right? And I'm like, whoa, no, it's not. If you get past the beginning stuff and you get into the emotional intelligence section, it's a little lighter content. But I had to start with what the intellect is and give a Islamic perspective on intellect, because we're talking about intelligence and intelligence being part of the prophetic model. And so it necessitated that we go into a bit of the intellect and aql and the side of the aql. There's some really interesting things that are in our Islamic literature about the role of the aql, and a lot of that has to do with explaining who we are as human beings. Why did Allah give us this aql? What's the role of the intellect, and so on and so forth.
So can you let our listeners know where we can find this amazing book and what else you're working on?
So right now you can find this book on Qalam's website. I've posted it on a lot of social media places. You can check it out there. Qalam Institute is where I'm teaching full time. We have a seminary there. We have online classes. We have all types of stuff going on at Qalam. And so a lot of, we sell the book on the website there. Also, I have my own blog that we're launching called propheticeq.com. You guys are the first to actually hear about it.
Oh, okay.
So
It's an honor, alhamdulillah.
yeah, I'll be having a lot of material on EQ and links to the book on propheticeq.com because I really want people to connect to this concept of emotional intelligence. I think it's huge when it comes to becoming a better Muslim, inshallah. So check out the blog, inshallah, subscribe. That way, like any new stuff coming out, you can read and, you know, be beneficial, inshallah ta'ala.
For sure.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us on the 4th podcast, Sheikh Mikaeel. It was very much an honor for us to hear you drop that.
No, man, thanks for having me, man.
Yes.
And inshallah, this is very beneficial for all those that listen, inshallah. And it was a pleasure being with you guys.
Alhamdulillah. So be sure to give us a follow on Instagram at the4th.productions and on Twitter at the4th_prod. Now we will go on a 2-week break, 1 week longer than last time. We'll be prepped for season 3. Because it's quote unquote holiday season, we will be back in January. Make sure you follow us on our social media to keep up to date on what we're up to. As of now, we hope you have a great day.